So much, Jeff and Julie, for that fabulous presentation and discussion. I'm sure it's generated a lot of inspiration for collaboration ideas, probably particularly of a translational flavor. And that really leads us into our final panel session, which looks a little further afield than our previous discussions and focuses on extending your reach to foster national and international collaborations. So today we're going to dig into building connections, using research conferences, peer review, and mentors and other tactics to sort of establish yourself and your lab on the national and international scene. So let me start by introducing you to our panelists. We'll start with Dr. Penny Gilbert, who's an associate professor at the University of Toronto in the Institute of Biomedical Engineering, where she holds a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Endogenous Repair. She's cross-appointed to the Donnelly Center and the Department of Cell and Systems Biology. She obtained her BSc from Haverford College in 1999 and her PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in 2006. She then conducted postdoctoral studies with Dr. Helen Blau at Stanford University in the area of skeletal muscle stem cells. Penny then joined the University of Toronto in 2012, and her interdisciplinary team explores muscle stem cell mechanobiology and engineers 3D human skeletal muscle cultures with the goal of identifying signaling pathways that can be tweaked to boost the function of muscle stem cells residing in our skeletal muscle tissues. I've never said skeletal muscle so many times. All right, then we have Dr. Fabio Rossi, who obtained his MD from his hometown university in Genoa, Italy. During his undergraduate studies, he investigated the mechanisms underlying chondrocyte differentiation in the labs of Ranieri Kensida. You can tell me if I pronounced that incorrectly. Next, he joined the PhD program at the European Molecular Biology Labs in Heidelberg, where he studied the influence of avian retroviral oncogenes in cellular differentiation under the supervision of Thomas Graf. His interest in this topic led him to continue his training at Stanford University. We see a bit of a theme here in Dr. Helen Blau's lab, where he pioneered the use of beta-galactosidase complementation as a reporter for protein-protein interactions in live cells. He then moved to the University of British Columbia to open up his lab in 2001, and his research focus is now in the biology and therapeutic applications of adult stem cells, specifically on the role of inflammation and regeneration and in degenerative diseases. Finally, we have Dr. Bernard Thébaud, who is a clinician scientist with the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute and CHEO's Research Institute, as well as a neonatologist with CHEO. There must be an easier way to say that. I'm probably not saying it correctly, where he provides CHEO, perfect, that's easier. With CHEO, where he provides care to critically ill newborns. He's also a professor of pediatrics at the University of Ottawa and holds the U-Ottawa Partnership Research Chair in Regenerative Medicine. Dr. Thébaud obtained his MD at the University Louis Pasteur in Strasbourg, France in 1991, and trained in pediatrics and neonatology at the University of Paris in Paris, France, where he also obtained his MSc and PhD. He then completed a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Alberta. His research is focused on developing stem cell-based therapies for patients with incurable lung diseases such as bronchopulmonary dysplasia, a chronic lung disease that follows ventilator and oxygen treatments for acute failure to breathe in babies born very prematurely. His group was the first to show that stem cells derived from human perinatal tissues can prevent and restore experimental neonatal lung damage. He's now extending his observations to other complications of prematurity. So today with our fabulous panelists, we're going to discuss all about national and international networks and collaborations. So for me personally, collaborations or ideas are always floating around, always making me very excited. And I have these kind of discussions with people that I would love to collaborate with. But I think part of the challenge, at least for me, and I'm sure others will weigh in with their questions as well, is how to balance your time, dedicating, your research time and funding and that of your trainees to these collaborative ideas that you're coming up with versus the sort of core projects that are in your lab. So perhaps we can start with that question.
Maybe I can start. And
yeah, that'd be great.
Have Fabio and Bernard jump in. So, this is always the challenge, right? It's so exciting to think of new collaborations and you want to do everything, right? But especially early on, it is wise to really strategize the collaborations that you embark on, at least early on. So first off, your primary goal is to publish papers. And so you have ideas, you have students that you have set out to work on projects that you're really excited about, and it makes it really difficult to really execute and finish those projects if you are extending your students' activities to also, pick at collaborations here and there. So part of it is, where are you at in terms of the maturity of your team? Are they at the point where your students have published their first paper and they're really independent, and they're at the point where they can kind of, part of their time can be committed to something else? Or alternatively, is there dedicated funding in place that allows you to really bring in someone new to pursue it? In which case, the rules of engagement are different. But there's also your own time as well. So our time is just being divided between so many things. And if you really want to be invested in a collaboration, there's a lot of work that's involved in making sure that it continues to progress. And there's only so much time in a day. So for me personally, because I invest a lot of my personal time in pretty much every project in my lab, it makes it difficult for me to spread myself too thin as much as I would really love to. And if I were to go back to my former self when I was starting my lab, I think I would tell myself to pluck like 50% of the collaborations that I had started then. I'm speaking from the perspective of the many mistakes that I made along the way, by the way.
Yeah, I agree with Penny, and the important word I think was to be strategic. At the beginning, it's important that the collaborations are useful to you, and ideally you would initiate them because you know what you want to achieve, what projects you're interested in. And if in order to achieve them, a collaboration could be useful, then yes, definitely look out for these people that can give you this additional edge and help you to get those papers published. Conversely, if other people approach you for collaboration, and if these are senior people, they should understand that you are in your early career and they should not burden you with a collaboration. But on the other hand, they should have your best interest in mind.
Well, the way I see it, there's two types of collaborations: the ones you initiate and the ones someone else initiates, right? When you initiate a collaboration, what you're looking for is something, an assay, a specific skill and expertise that the other lab has and you don't. And you could probably set it up, but it would take you 2 years and a lot of money, and it's not worth doing. And then that's definitely something that I would encourage. And the trick there is to be very clear at the beginning on who's doing what and what the boundaries of the collaboration are. Very similar situation when someone looks for you. You need to be clear, okay, are you looking for me because I'm the youngest here and you want me on my grant? Sure, as long as you don't bug me and you don't ask me to waste too much time. Or are you looking for me because I know how to do this specific thing? Now, if that is the case, depending on the magnitude of the work that goes into doing that specific thing, you can or not do it. If it's something that's going to take your grad student, like Penny was saying, that's really busy doing his own project, 2 afternoons or even 2 weeks, it may be worth it if it's something important enough. But it needs to be well defined. It needs to have well defined boundaries, and you need to be able to resist the big sucking sound from the collaborator lab on the time of your trainees, especially early on, right? If the collaboration is defined and, yes, we shall run this assay for you, and in exchange, we are going to get this, I don't know, author position, whatever, always to be better to define it early on, even though every time it gets renegotiated close to the end of the collaboration. then I think it's okay to collaborate. And in fact, if you think about it, when you go for tenure 5 years later, the committee will look at how collaborative you were. And, you know, if you're too collaborative, then it's a problem. But that's only a problem if you're not the last author of papers, or, you know, your trainee is not the first author or something like this. But if you're also not collaborative enough, that's a problem. And the last thing you want is your department colleagues that are part of the committee saying, "Whoa, I tried to talk to this person and she didn't really give me the light of day," or something like this, right? So it's a balance. And my advice would be boundaries, very well defined, early deals, possibly in writing. I got burned so many times, you have no idea, because I'm a trusting guy. And once you do that, then I think collaborations are very positive, because these days, none of us can do everything.
Yeah,
Great.
I want
Penny.
to extend one point that Fabio made about really defining the collaboration early on, because it's also important to make sure you are talking about a collaboration, because there are a number of situations where someone comes to you and, you know, if you're a tool builder, for example, or you have techniques that your lab is known for, they may be coming to you and you may be thinking that it's a collaboration, but really they are expecting that you're just going to provide training or provide the tool or provide what have you. And then you run into the issue on the other end that Fabio mentioned, where you in your heart feel you've collaborated a lot, but there's no metric of it on your CV, but you've lost that time and your students have lost that time. And that's something you can never get back.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think following up on those kind of two classes of collaborations, one where you kind of initiated and the other where you're being invited, perhaps we can start on the negative side of how to say no, and then we can talk about how to invite others. So how does one politically say no without coming off as a not so collaborative person?
I haven't got the foggiest idea. My no gene is methylated constitutively, and that's one of my biggest problems.
I would agree. I would agree. I think as an ECR, you should always lean on the ECR card all the time. Until you have tenure, you always get to use the, oh, you know, my group is small. I really need to focus on the projects that are in my group and make sure that our papers are being published, that I'm in a good position for tenure. And if they push you on it, just always bring it back to that messaging. You always until you get tenure.
Or you can say, well, you know, my group is small, everybody's busy, I don't have the bandwidth. However, if you pay for the person, I can go for it, or something like this, right? But my advice is you have to be able to say no without burning bridges, because you never know what's going to happen 10 years from now and what relative position you will have with that investigator that is pushing you to do something you don't want to do. So it's a diplomatic exercise.
Yeah, and probably one that we would benefit from asking our mentors, you know, maybe review an email before we send it and burn that bridge, right? So maybe now we can chat about the flip side, unless Bernard, you had something to add about the how to say no.
No, I just confirmed what you said.
Sounds great. Okay, so now we can start talking about the positive side, how to initiate these collaborations that you think would be really useful for your strategy and your needs. How to set these kind of expectations and logistically manage the project. What are kind of do's and don'ts in that realm?
I think it goes back to the issue of boundaries there. I think as long as you set the boundaries, within those boundaries, you don't necessarily need to micromanage too much. And if those are clear to everybody, how to set realistic expectation. I think setting realistic expectation is always a big mistake. You should always shoot for the moon and then be happy with what you get, in a way, if you see what I mean.
Can I ask you, Fabio, to expand on that a little bit? Because saying defining boundaries sounds very clear, but unless you've been in a situation where you need to define the boundaries, you might not know what the boundaries look like.
Yeah, but essentially it's making sure that you are, as the supervisor, you are part of the experimental planning, if not in the details, at least in the big picture, so that doesn't happen that your student get excited because he's involved in this collaboration, maybe with the big shot, and you know, it gets sucked into that trap of spending 80% of their time on the collaboration and 20% on their own project. And that's
The
what I
one
mean.
boundary is, what is this project at this phase, and what are the go, no-go decisions to decide whether we move forward?
Right. And if your experiment A tells you that you should be doing experiment B, C, D, and E, we discuss it before you start.
Perhaps it also warrants a discussion with your trainees then who would be involved, and to kind of warn them of signs when these boundaries are being crossed and what these boundaries are as well. Because I imagine, especially my trainees, I've noticed they get really excited about things. And so that tendency to get sucked in, I think, will be there.
Yeah, I think, you know, you set the boundaries with the collaborating entity at the beginning, but the only way to actually guard that border is through your training. You know what I mean? So that, you said it exactly right.
Great.
I think it also speaks to the type of collaboration. There are some that just organically grow, and you know it's the right one, and then others where if they feel a bit strenuous, then you have to be careful and reassess things. It has to come natural, and you have to be excited about it, and yeah, be also excited to work with that person. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
So on the topic of these kind of organic emerging collaboration ideas, what about situations where your trainees, you know, really identified this particular new direction? I know as a trainee, conversations in the elevator led to a potential collaboration, and it ended up working out. But I was in this sort of position where, you know, my supervisor allowed that to happen and kind of empowered me to do that. I can imagine that for an ECR, that would be an especially difficult decision where you want to empower your trainees. And often that leads to exciting new things in your lab, but you also don't want to overextend. So how do we navigate those types of situations?
Personally, I always encourage the trainees taking the initiative. And yes, of course, then you have to make sure that they actually not just excited about the shiny object they see in the distance, but they have a plan to get there. But this is what you want in the lab. What you want in the lab is engaged people that will take the initiative, not drones that will just do what you tell them. So great. I should tell my guys to take the elevator more often.
No, I completely agree. I've always been very excited by students coming to me and telling me about bumping into someone in the building or at a conference and discussing a collaboration idea. And yeah, in that case, I do feel like it's all about really going back to exactly the same point that Fabio made about setting up collaborations and just having a really well-defined first set of pilot experiments. And then if it looks interesting, then you start to discuss, okay, well, maybe to move this further, we need funding, or we need something. And then you identify those things along the way together so that you're ensured that everyone's achieving the goals that they need to achieve while also being intellectually stimulated.
Great. And going back to the point made earlier about identifying a true collaboration and setting those definitions and boundaries versus perhaps a kind gesture where you're helping another lab, but there's no clear collaboration, no clear gain on your CV. How do we identify these two different situations? Are there keywords or perhaps follow-up questions that we should propose to clarify?
I think for me, at this point, if I know that it's something that is a specialized technique that would be really difficult to just show in an hour and transfer to another group, or throw into something that we're already doing and provide preliminary data on, I usually start the conversation of collaboration and authorship very explicitly. And then if that's not the interest of the other group, you may just not hear from them about it again. And if they are, then they usually almost always will say, oh yeah, no, of course. And then you know you were all on the same page in that moment.
Yeah, it's always tricky when they ask you to learn the technique that you spent the last 2 years optimizing, right? Because you put so much time and work in that. And yeah, you may be able to hand it off in one day, but then poof, all that time and work is being given as a present to the collaborator if you don't have a deal. And this happens a lot, to be honest. In a way, as a principle, I think you should always help your colleague next door if they want to, you know, learn a technique. But if it's a complicated thing, you know, what I usually say is like, well, you know, talk to this person, and whenever they'll do it again, you can shadow them. And if that's enough, good. If they want more, then we need to talk about authorship. Generally speaking, it's always better to tell them, look, it took me 2 years to get this to work. You may want me to do it for you, which is, yeah.
And of course, these days, shadowing may mean wearing a GoPro and you stand over there and watch the video. Okay. So that kind of brings me to this question of kind of pre and post COVID, pre-C and post-C, as Peter Zanstra said in the last session. And how this has influenced collaboration opportunities in good and bad ways. On one hand, it's kind of broken down these geographical boundaries because we're all on Zoom now. But on the other hand, the more organic types of conference meetings and bumping into elevators are not a reality. So how do you think we can take advantage of the positives that COVID has brought collaborations and navigate the not so great side?
I think Bernard should start here because he's threatened to mute me several times.
I think that is a difficult question. I have not thought about this. I think it's a difficult question because we don't have enough experience with pre and post COVID, because we are still not in post COVID, I think that we will learn to use the modern technologies better and more efficiently as we progress. It definitely, I think, has eased to cross distances, and you can just anytime get access to potential collaborators. And so this is definitely an advantage. And I think we will see over time how collaborations will multiply exponentially.
It does feel like during COVID, a lot of collaboration is born very specifically from funding opportunities and the desire to put together a team and try to put together an application, which, exactly as you said, really wasn't the primary driver of initiating collaborations in the past. In the past, it would be, oh, we ran into each other at the stem cell network, and we saw a poster, and now we're collaborating. We're not really having that sort of organic establishment of collaboration. It's a lot more directed. It's just different, I guess. For me, it's provided, and I think my group, a lot more time to focus exactly on our own research. But also I have noticed that we've had more people reaching out for collaboration that I might not have bumped into at a conference for reasons such as mobility challenges or otherwise, and that feels like it's been a good thing. I don't know if there's been a bit more empowerment and more leveraging of the online platform in that way, so that seems like a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, what's missing is the unstructured playtime that we used to get. Yeah. And as we know, that's important at all ages for creativity. And but I must say that there are advantages on the other hand, like, and maybe not in every field happens, but for example, in mine and Penny's field, the muscle field, there was a huge community that formed around the Slack channel, and there are talks every week from people that normally you wouldn't get to hear the talk of, because either they're not big enough shots to be the speakers at the conference, or because they can't afford to go to the conference you are picking to go to that year. So in a way, there is a contraction of unstructured interaction, but there's a massive expansion of structured interaction. And my suggestion is keep them going. If someone gives an interesting talk, you know, keep interacting with them on this new tools. Like, you know, my lab never used Slack before COVID. Now they do nothing else. And I think this is great because it will facilitate maintaining interactive relationship with people across the world in the post-COVID era.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I saw on Slack that they have this new feature, Slack Connect, or maybe it's new to me, maybe it's been there for a while, but you can now create channels between labs and between groups. So I think that's another opportunity for that type of collaboration as well. Just a quick reminder that we do have the Q&A and the chat features. So I'm sure others have more better questions than I do, but I will continue to fire them until we get some more organic discussion going. So I think Penny brought up the point that a lot of how collaboration used to happen was these kinds of bump into people and then go search for funding. How do you get funding? And is that sort of the better way to go about it, where you come up with the idea and then search for the right funding fit, perhaps never find one? Or is it more strategic, particularly as in ECR, to look out for funding and then try to find the collaborator to fit that?
I think as an ECR, team grants are good in general, but they are especially great if you're the leader. And if you can have a team grant with 2 or 3 established scientists and actually be the nominated PI, that looks amazing on your CV, right? Now, this is easier than you'd think, because the big shot PIs don't want to be the PI on the grant. There is a lot of responsibility and work that comes with it. And very often they try to kind of shove it to the young guys, right? My advice is take it on. Don't shy. I mean, within limits, of course, you need to safeguard your time, but go for it, because you are going to be interacting with senior colleagues, if you are lucky, and the reviewers of your CV will look at it and say, wow, look at this guy. He managed to attract the attention of all these big shots and is leading this collaboration at this young age. So from that point of view, team grants can be a huge boost to your CV. But you need to have your own grants too, otherwise it's a problem, and you have to balance the two.
And that team grant has to be, of course, one of the primary topics of your research.
It does really need to be aligned. And in terms of what types of team grants does it make sense for ECRs to lead? I think there are some pros and cons to different types. There are quite a large number nowadays of team grant opportunities that are funded for a year or 2 period. And I've benefited from those in my career, but they were very, very, very challenging to manage as an ECR. And the primary difficulty, which I think you could strategize a solution to get around, is that If the funding is for a year or two and you don't already have staff in place to pursue that work, it means that you need to draw upon the limited time of others in your group to be able to achieve the goals that you set forward. So in general, I favor at this point funding opportunities that are in the range of 3 to 5 years, because it provides enough time to get staff in place, and it's just a much more realistic time window. But if you are pursuing 1 or 2 year grant opportunities, hindsight is always 20/20. and I think I would say Fabio's advice of having some big wigs on your grant is important for another reason that you might not think of, which is that you can use their reputation to help you recruit really strong people who would be in a position to be able to make progress on a team grant in a 1 or 2 year period. And that ends up being particularly important in the context of hiring postdocs. I mean, I think it's not well appreciated that even in molecular genetics, who's a department at the University of Toronto that's linked to the Hospital for Sick Children, I think it's only approximately 15 to 20% of labs in that department have a postdoc. And that really tells you something. It's not actually that easy to secure a postdoc. So if you're able to recruit someone through this more established individual and they're being co-advised and they're getting a reference letter from both you and that established person, you might be more inclined to be able to staff that grant. But otherwise, I really have a hard time with the 1 to 2 year grants for ECRs.
Yeah, they should be exploited to get preliminary data for the bigger CHR or NSERC grants.
So one such grant like this that came to my mind, although I'm not really well versed on all the opportunities out there, so we'll talk about that. But one that I do know of is the Human Frontier Science Program. And that one kind of provides relatively short-term funding, brings together really interdisciplinary and international groups of labs to come together. And that kind of provides opportunities for really injecting diversity and in expertise, but cultures, right, in your teams. Have you seen that to really be an advantage? Are there should we really be pursuing that? Should we be doing that in other grant opportunities more intentionally?
So I led a successful Human Frontier Science Program grant as an ECR, and I'm also on the review panel right now. So anyone who's on this call, please, at any point, if you're thinking about applying for a Human Frontiers grant, leading or being on one, do not hesitate to reach out to me, because I would be happy to help you refine and think your application. And at least for me, it's kind of like scientific dessert, if you will, because the constraints of this funding opportunity are so great. I mean, you have to have 2 to 3 people who are from very disparate research backgrounds. So you have to be studying something about fundamental biology. It cannot be applied. That is just an opportunity to geek out about how the world works. And so those sorts of opportunities, I mean, the funding rate is extremely low, but it's a really great opportunity to expand your network, because you have to bring in people from other countries, because that's another constraint. Each investigator needs to be situated in a different country. And ideally, they shouldn't all be in North America or Europe or otherwise. So it's a great opportunity to come up with crazy ideas and then start using Google to see, okay, is there someone who does XYZ, and then just start cold emailing and calling people to build a team. But it's a very different type of funding opportunity. It's very different than, for example, leading a CIHR grant and bringing in collaborators onto something like that.
Great. And I think we all kind of recognize that conferences are a natural place. Now we know elevators are a great place to find these collaborators, but perhaps networks like Stem Cell Network are also a great place to look. And we have a question from Kate Murray, who's asking, how has the Stem Cell Network helped you build your own networks, and how can they better help ECRs to find these networks and collaborations?
Okay, I got to Canada a few months after the Stem Cell Network started. I am that old. And I must say that without the Stem Cell Network, I would not have met everybody that really I wanted to interact with within a couple of years. It was amazing for a new person starting the lab from scratch, coming from outside the country. You know, it took a couple of Till and McCullough's meeting to get to know everybody that was worth knowing. And so I'm a big fan of that. Many other things about the network we can discuss, but the ability to network and to get to know other people and the exposure, it's absolutely amazing.
I completely agree with Fabio. When our program was more and more regenerative medicine oriented, I found out about the Stem Cell Network, and from then on, like our research developed exponentially, and I learned so much from the Stem Cell Network investigators about stem cells, regenerative medicine, and it was a real catalyzer. And yeah, without the Stem Cell Network, we would not have been in a clinical trial right now.
Yeah, I would echo all of this sentiment. I came to Canada as a non-Canadian, and my almost within the first couple of months, my first experience was a Till and McCullough conference, and the group was just so inviting and warm, and it literally grabbed me by the arm and dragged me around to introduce me to everyone. And so within 2 months, I had a better national network in Canada than even a local network, which really set the tone for the research in my group as well, to ensure that it kind of kept that national flavor. We still interact across the country.
Yeah, and one of the focus of the Stem Cell Network is also on the trainees. So early on, when they then transition to early career investigator, they have already their network established, and it helps them with collaborations later down the road, because they know already these different people. And the Stem Cell Network, even though it's Canadian, invites every year outstanding speakers from all around the world, and this also enables collaboration with these people.
Yeah, so I also definitely benefited from the Stem Cell Network being there as a trainee, and it's kind of set the stage for my ongoing networking collaborations. For those like Penny and Fabio who kind of became injected into the Stem Cell Network after they became ECRs, how do you recommend making best use of the network? I know maybe this is an appropriate place to plug the fact that they have this early career investigator speaker competition, and they're selecting these ECRs to speak at the Till and McCullough meetings. Is that a good place to start? What are other ways to kind of build your network?
Okay, you are asking someone that is 1 year away from being a boomer. So I must qualify that, because I think the most amazing thing that the network does for ECRs is provide them visibility. You know, you go there, you know, it used to be meetings, now I don't know, it's online things or competitions like the one you said, and you're on stage, and everybody that you want to notice you is there in the audience. And so that's amazing. You know, Canada-wide in this field of regenerative medicine, that's the best place to show off. Of course, as I said, I'm a near boomer, so I'm not a Twitter guy or a social media guy these days. There may be better ways, but that was my point of view.
And the mindset is there, right? It's a network, and people want to collaborate.
Maybe I would add that it's also a really amazing opportunity to meet incredible students across the country, I would really encourage you to proactively involve yourself in some of the trainee organized events at the Tillamoockullough conference. They're incredible, and really the students that I have met, I'm still interacting with, and now some of them are professors at universities. It's amazing.
That's a great point. I didn't think of, building a network with trainees, as an intentional target of building your network. But I think that's a great point that we should think about.
They're driving the science, right? So
Exactly.
They're really the best ones to intersect with and learn what's hot. Being a poster judge, you should absolutely volunteer to be a poster judge. I have had the pleasure to judge some amazing posters and meet fantastic students and learn about great research across Canada. That's a treat.
And it's,
plus
I guess,
today's, plus
Go ahead.
today's trainee may be tomorrow's department director.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true. Or that could be a great way to find your trainees and postdocs. And I had a sort of follow-up question related to the point made by Penny, or maybe it was Fabio or Bernard, that you can lean on these kind of more established PIs when you're trying to get great postdocs, for example, which is a challenge for ECRs. And in a recent sort of interaction, one of my more established collaborators suggested we do this by sharing the postdoc, spending 1 year with me and the other year in the US with them. How do you think these sort of logistical approaches to postdocs in particular are best managed?
Is this a collaborative project?
It would be. But do you think that's kind of a strategy to encourage applicants and then have the ability to really physically interact with that person with their project?
Yeah, potentially.
Are there better ways?
I think, yeah, if it's natural, if it makes total sense, then definitely there are no rules. And it can be an advantage, especially if that person then comes back to the university. This person will have acquired new skills. And but again, it just has to have the right feel and be the natural evolution. You start to work in your lab, and then the student moves over to the other investigator's lab. I think if it makes sense, then definitely there are no rules against that.
Great. So we have a couple questions coming in, and they're more on the competitor versus collaborator side and when collaborations go wrong. So perhaps we can start to move in that direction. We did have a section planned on intersections with other labs and when they should be your friend or your foe. So perhaps we can start with Daniel's question. What about potential competitors? Should you establish collaborations or run far away?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I can tell you what my experience was. I was scared of the potential competitors when I was an ECR, and I tried to stay away from collaborating with them. But I think it was more me and my insecurity than an actual problem in collaborating. And then with a lot of the people that used to scare me, like Michael Nika, it was really scary when I started the lab. Now he's a great guy and I have a great relationship with him, and I would collaborate with him, no problem, right? So it's more psychological than practical sometimes. And it's hugely dependent on the collaborator. And, it has happened to me that a senior collaborator, not out of evilness, just because they think that they're the senior person, that's their field, will automatically assume that they get the biggest part of the credit in a collaborative project. And it's so spontaneous that they don't even see that they're doing that. So it's a little bit tricky, and is very much dependent on the person you collaborate with and how self-aware they are of this type of behaviors. In some cases, that type of behavior led me to completely drop out of the field like early on, I was looking at T-cell migration, and I even published a couple of fairly big papers in the process. And then because I was collaborating with this guy that kept saying, well, I should be the last author because really this is my field, not your field. I said, okay, it's your field and you do it. And I completely switched off. Maybe I overreacted, but you know, there are situations like that in which, you know, emotions and psychology take a toll. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's generally just difficult to know, and you should give yourself the space to both try things and appreciate that it might not work out, and that doesn't mean that you're a failure. These situations, you can't predict what's going to happen on the other end, right? So if you have a lot of warning flags going up in your mind or your belly, steer clear. But if not, then it's at least worth potentially a conversation. One thing maybe to consider though as well is if this person is a competitor / working in a similar area, they may be someone who would be appropriate as a future reference letter on your tenure dossier. And then in that case, it might not make sense for you to collaborate with them before you have tenure anyway, but to maintain collegial relations with them so that you set yourself up to have very strong reference letters when it comes time for your department chair to start looking around. And that's another reason to be cautious in setting up too many collaborations when you're junior, because you do need to ask for reference letters. And if you're collaborating with everyone, who are we going to ask? And I was bad that way. So that's a lesson learned from my bad.
Yeah, I agree. From the outset, you should always be willing to listen and see what the deal is or what the ask is. I would also shy away from calling these people competitors, because are we really like in a race here, or are we doing science? Again, it has to feel right, and if not, then just very politely try to steer away from the collaboration, but always keep good relationships with people.
So Bernard, to your point, are we in a race or not? Perhaps I can give a more tangible example, and then you can say maybe what you would do in that situation. So I know I've seen it happen where you come across a poster or you've seen someone's paper coming together and it's on the same story, very much intersecting with what you planned. So in those situations, you could reach out and say, you know, let's collaborate and co-submit or something. What do you do in these types of scenarios?
So here again, it depends what makes the most sense. If a collaboration can catapult your own project to the next stratosphere, then definitely you should reach out and collaborate. On the other hand, it could be important that two different labs confirm the same findings, because it adds credibility to it. Again, it's this is how science advances, and if you have a great idea, it's very likely that somewhere else in the world, one person or one lab has the similar idea. I look at it from a physician's perspective. Our lab is, of course, very translational oriented. And our only goal is to get something into the clinic that will impact patient outcomes. And this is how I look at it. And I always ask myself, if I'm in doubt, what would parents want for their babies? And of course, they would like me to collaborate with that person if this brings something faster into the clinic. And they would always look at me in a funny way if I would say, oh yeah, this is a competitor. What do you mean competitor? I need a medication for my baby now. I don't care if you're competing with this person, right? Competing. Get your heads together and get the medication into the clinic.
Well, I answering the question about the papers, right? You're trying to publish your story, and you know there's someone else that has a similar story. I always contacted them, and I always compare notes, and I always ask if they are interested in co-submitting, right? And the other question you could have asked is, within a collaboration that is specific to a certain topic, do you talk to your collaborator about the other stuff that you're doing in the lab? And if I like the collaborator, yes, I do talk to them. It's not always reciprocal though, so pay attention. Yes.
And so I agree with Fabio. It's not always reciprocal, and but you know, it goes back to the last webinar about building your reputation. Over time, you will get a reputation that you're a collaborative person. And at times you will get burned, but over the lifespan of a career, you have to stay true to yourself and do what's right. And it will be recognized by everyone in the field.
That is such an important point. It is difficult, I think, when you're starting your lab to think about what you want to be remembered for, and when you reach, 30 years down the line, but it is a worthwhile conversation to have with yourself on a semi-regular basis, because it does help to kind of reset your own expectations and your priorities.
And then again, this is for the very difficult questions, this is where you have mentors that should be able to give you good advice.
Yeah, so I like the strategy of kind of going for the collaboration and being more open and sharing. What do you do in situations where you ask to co-submit, for example, if there's two publications that are potentially competing, but they turn you down or they don't reply? Do you then race to beat them? What's the follow-up?
At that point, the clock is ticking. At that point, they know you have this paper and they don't want you to be next to their paper. So finish it within 24 hours and send it out.
But I also think, keep in mind in the moment when someone else publishes something that is very similar to what your group has in the pipeline or in review or what have you, it feels so crushing. But your work is going to get published. And if things are basically published within the same year-ish, all of those things end up getting cited together. And it's easy to see that in hindsight. It's impossible to see it in the moment. It feels so bad.
This is true for you, Penny, as the PI, but for the postdoc that is getting the Journal of Immunology instead of the Nature Immunology paper, it's a problem, right? Because their next job depends on really some fairly dry matrix based on impact factors and stuff like that for the first screening. And you know how it is every time there's 100 applications. So the first cut is done based on, when did he publish? and yeah, so I agree from a PI point of view, it's not a disaster, but it's still crushing my heart because I think about the trainee that got scooped, right? Which is why you write it in 24 hours and send it out at that point.
That's when the race starts then, okay.
Yes.
What about situations where collaborations don't go as planned? This was a question from Carl. How do you deal with that, especially if they are bigwigs that you're interacting with?
By the way, if you need to write your paper now, it's okay. We can finish it without you.
No, I'm not telling you anything that I'm about to submit. No, I'm joking. Well, a conflict in a collaboration. I think once the conflict arises, it's almost too late. it usually always leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth, and it really interferes with the sharing of trust that needs to be there for a collaboration. So it's a problem, and I don't have a good answer to how to manage conflict. Again, it's very dependent on personalities. I go back to my advice that sometimes it's better to, you know, take it for the team and not burn the bridge, even though it's of course a learning experience for future interaction with the same characters. And the best thing you can do is make damn sure you avoid conflicts by being extremely clear and upfront.
Yeah, I agree with Fabio. And for me, like a collaboration, to know whether it has a good feel and it will go well, is always the question, am I ready to just take my phone now and call this person up? If the answer is no, you know something's off, and then you have to get to the bottom of it. If the answer is yes, then you know this is you feel good about this collaboration, and you can go ahead. That's of course before things turn sour.
That's a great point. And perhaps one of the strategies to help avoid these conflicts is to think about what are the most volatile times in a collaboration and anticipate them, to plan for them. So in your experience and opinion, what do you think are these potentially volatile times?
Okay. The classical one is, this happened to me several times. Yes, we should collaborate on this. And by the way, my postdoc will have the first author, and he's leaving the lab next month, so he won't be able to really continue the work, but he's already done so much that he's going to have the first authorship. Right? What do you answer to that?
So that's even before it started. Exactly.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, that happened to me. It's because, and I understand it, you're trying to protect your trainee, but how am I gonna sell to my trainee? Oh, by the way, you got, you know, worked on a year on this collaborative project, and by the way, you're not gonna be the first author, even though you produce most of the figures, because some guy developed the model. And, you know, developing the model is a big deal. You understand why they're asking for it, but at the same time, it doesn't work for everybody. So, yeah.
Any other volatile times? I'm sure authorship is one, as we've discussed.
Yeah, authorship, I think, is the main one. I think in general, maybe writing on occasion can be an event. Sort of, it depends, but it's not common.
That's why Fabio said right from the beginning, that's where you have to set the boundaries, and especially authorship. I think this is always the critical element, and that has to be discussed early on.
Early on, but also often, because I mean, Fabio raises a really good point in the scenario that he described, which is that authorship really is a little bit more fluid than we would like to say. You enter into a project and you have an idea and you know who's going to do what. And in that moment, authorship seems very, very clear. But then everything evolves and authorship may need to evolve with that. And so keeping a clear line of communication and making sure that you have those conversations as often as necessary might be one way to help prevent this conflict. I can't say I'm very good at doing that, but saying it out loud, it feels like really good advice.
I can give you another case study. And this is a classical situation in which you have a collaboration. There's you know, postdoc in your collaborators lab, one in your lab. And the authorship is not really all that clear. And these two guys start to compete with each other within the collaboration, or who does the critical experiments first. And the result is they are both trying to do the same experiment. And they're wasting time, they're wasting resources. Happened to me, I swear. And they don't tell each other which experiments they are doing because, you know, oh, I had the idea for this key experiment, I can answer this question. But if I tell him, he may be able to do it sooner because his colony has more mice or some bullshit like this, you know, pardon my French. I've seen that happen. So this is why you need to really have strong communication, and you don't collaborate with someone that does experiments without having discussed them with you.
That was Italian, not French.
Don't get me started, otherwise I reveal names.
So in that type of situation, what do you do?
It's a mess. You sit everybody down and say, guys, you know, you can't duplicate experiments and waste resources. Please, you know, who is doing what? And you make a list. Communication again.
Great. Another sort of question that came up in the chat. What do you think about reference checking potential collaborators, especially if you're Googling to find one to fit, let's say, your grant needs? Do you then reach out to people that you see that they've published with and ask how they were, or is there a good way to do this?
I do it if I know them personally. It does seem a little weird to ask someone that you don't know at all about someone else that you don't know at all, right? But definitely, I mean, within my own institution, I always check. Because there's people that are serial bastards, you know, out there, even among our colleagues, and you want to stay the heck away from those.
Yeah, I think in general, people are comfortable answering the question, have you collaborated with this person? Are they a good collaborator? Because you're not really asking anything really targeted. So it doesn't hurt to ask, but I agree. It would be very awkward to ask people that you don't know about someone that you don't know. But certainly, yeah, if they're in your network, it can't hurt as a quick check.
So going back to the point about how it can be really important to be the lead of these national or international collaborations with bigwigs early on, how realistic is it to establish this? How does one go about doing this without, you know, risking bringing in these big people that then end up being silent collaborators, just a name on your grant?
Yeah. Again, personalities. I mean, the best situation you can be in is when the bigwig comes to you and say, hey, why don't we do this together? And by the way, you should lead the grant because I'm too busy doing administration or something, right? So that's where you have the win-win situation. In every other situation, it depends on the personality of the person that you're interacting with, because, you know, as an ECR, you know, you have ideas, but very little else under your belt. And as we know, ideas are a dime a dozen. The problem is making them work. That's the tricky part. And so when you're looking for a collaborator at that level, you kind of have to spill your ideas, and you don't really have any way to make sure that they are not pillaged, right? But again, I always picked the high risk way of spilling the ideas, because I'm doing this mostly for fun. And that would not be fun, to be paranoid and secretive for the rest of my life, you know. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah, thanks, Fabio. I think that was a very important message, that it should be fun, and you should be able to reach out to those big wigs. And yeah, sometimes it will not work out, but other times you would be surprised how open these so-called big wigs are. Again, ego has no place in science, and because there's a bigger goal behind this. When as an established scientist, you see a young, eager investigator with a good idea, you want to support this person in any way you can. And this person should become actually a mentor at FAR.
So on the point of mentors, how do you avoid competing with your own mentors? The most obvious is your PhD and postdoc, but sometimes you gain other mentors and you don't want to burn those bridges.
I mean, for me, I took my research program in completely different directions. The upside of that is that there was zero competition with my former advisors. The downside of that is you're not starting your research program with something tangible. So there's gonna be delays in starting your independent lab. So I don't know if I would recommend that strategy, the strategy that I used, but it's one strategy that you could use. I think you need something sort of more in the middle.
Exactly the same for me. I did a little bit of work related to what I had done in my postdoc advisor lab, and I ended up having to put the postdoc advisor on that paper because, well, I guess you could justify it by saying that it was based on things I had learned in that lab. Although I think it's a bit of a stretch as a justification, because learning things isn't exactly what they are there for. So then after that experience, I dumped the whole field again and switched to something completely different, so that there was nobody there that could have claims on that. And you know, it very much perhaps depend on your advisor too, and the attitude that they have. And please don't read too much in the fact that both me and Penny had the same advisor and we took the same strategy.
So my mentor, when I submitted to him my first, like a draft of my first grant, or the idea that I would like to pursue, he flat out told me, no, you can't do that because it's too close to what I do and you will not be seen as independent. And I was so mad. And so it lasted like 2 or 3 days. And then I said, okay, listen to what he's telling you. And then I started to look at it the other way and came up with my own ideas. And in retrospect, it was the best advice he had ever given me.
That's a nice way to view it too. Yeah.
But then there is other mentors that essentially tell all the trainees, whatever you're doing in my lab, you can take with you. And you know, what I usually tell them is, I will go out of my way not to compete with you for the first 3 years. I cannot promise you that I will not get interested in this topic at some point and not resist, but I will do my best to give you a running start.
It does seem like it's unlikely that two groups are going to pursue really exactly the same thing or even in the same way. Not that it doesn't happen, but one parameter to kind of keep in the mix as well is, are you and your former advisor in the same country? Because if you're not actually having labs in the same country, there's a little more flexibility in this, unless you're, you know, I don't know. Yeah.
Yes, because then you're not necessarily competing for the same national pot of money.
Yeah, you're not competing for the same national money, or really any of the same money.
And over time, you will get different ideas. You will meet different people. And even if you stay close, again, it's important that for a particular new discovery, it gets confirmed by others, so that we know that this is a true finding and it can be built upon.
I've also noticed that in general, what you have in your mind, what you've proposed for your independent lab looks really neat and tidy on your research proposal, and you start your lab and you start pursuing those projects, and they just go in different directions, or you meet someone in the lab next door and decide to kind of take it in a completely different direction. And so sometimes these conversations that you end up having with your former advisors where you're creating these boundaries, they become irrelevant within a month of starting your own lab. And it's something that you've worried about. So you've spent a lot of mental energy on something that was unlikely to happen.
No plan survives meeting the enemy.
So we've spoken a lot so far about your research scientific network. Perhaps we can start to chat about other players in your network that could be advantageous. One such person could be editors, right? Networking with editors from journals can have huge implications, right? So I wonder if you have any advice on how to build these relationships with journal editors. It's good for, reviewing papers, but sometimes getting invited for writing a perspective piece or a review, and these things, tend to build up over time. So how do we build that?
You talk to them.
Yeah, I think that the main thing is they're often at conferences, whether you know it or not, and you should make it your priority to find out and make a quick chat with them. Be ready with whatever it is that you're kind of thinking about. And anytime there's a roundtable with the editors, which often happens at conferences as well, you should absolutely take those opportunities, because as much as it pains me to admit this, those relationships with the editors, at least right now, in the way that publishing works right now, which I hope implodes at some point, matter. They are the door that opens. It's horrible.
Yeah. And this is what I was, part of what I was referring before when I said the network was great because it puts you on stage. The editors will be in the audience when you're on stage. And also when you are in the audience asking questions. So make you a nuisance of yourself and they will notice you. And Bernard can testify that that's what I've been doing for the past 20 years.
I was just going to say something. You
I
anticipated that very nicely, Fabio.
So in addition to presenting and making a nuisance, asking questions, do you prepare retroactively, like a pitch, an elevator pitch of a story you're working on for an editor with figures? Like, do you come with like slides and you're ready?
I do all of the above. I mean, if I have a story that I think could maybe go in a journal that I know an editor is going to be there, I have prepared a 30-second pitch and a 5 to 6 slide deck just in case. It doesn't hurt to be prepared. And I think one of the things that you'll find as ECRs is you're doing all of these things that you've never done before. And the first time you do them all very badly. And so just expect that it's going to be an awkward situation and be over prepared, because then at least you'll feel like I've mapped out in my mind a little bit about how this interaction is going to go. And you won't feel so ill prepared. And then later on you can do, like Fabio and Bernard do, and just talk to them casually about the next great thing in your pipeline.
I mean, the key is 30 seconds, right? That's the amount of time you have their attention for, unless you grab it and keep it. And so I always go for the high view concept of the paper. I don't show figures because of, you tell them what the concept is, where is the novelty, and why everybody's gonna wanna know. And that you can maybe do in 30 seconds. And then if you see that spark in their eyes, then maybe you can pull out the figures and, yeah.
And in your experience, what is the outcome? Is it yes, we'd be interested in maybe reviewing or looking at your abstract?
Never. The outcome is always send it in and we'll see. However, it makes a huge difference.
That's
when you send it in. Oh, sorry, Penny.
No.
When you send it in, they remember you, they know your face. And being able to attach a face to the manuscript psychologically makes a massive difference, whether they admit it or not.
Absolutely.
And
Sorry,
when you
Penny.
write your cover letter, you get to put that sentence, we spoke at blah, 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 and blah, 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 which all of a sudden gives you a personal connection in that memory. Otherwise, you have a generic cover letter that you hope, is exciting.
Bernard, did you have a point there? I think you got cut off for a sec.
No, I just confirmed what Fabio was saying. It's having being able to attach a face to the manuscript helps.
So do you find these discussions with editors helps you then get invited for peer reviews, and then those opportunities add on over time? Or is there kind of better ways to be on the scientific network radar for invitations to review grants, papers, and then be invited for perspective pieces and so on?
Yes, to the point that it becomes a double-edged weapon.
Mm-hmm.
You get a lot of reviews sometimes from some journals, but there's huge advantages in being in that position. One of them is that you're actually finding out early what everybody else is trying to publish, which is good. And the fact that you are maintaining your relationship with the editor by providing, reasonable, timely review, and that's how it goes on.
Also, with regards to grant competition review panels, I think this is also a great opportunity to learn and expand your network. So you should always be happy to be invited to a CIHR or NSERC review panel. You learn a lot. So since 2000, I won't say it, but since I got my first grant, I have continuously reviewed for CIHR.
Wait, no, that was still MRC, Bernard. I'm joking.
It was CIHR, but yeah, it's one way of giving back to the community, but it's also a great way to expand your network and to learn.
Well, in that regard, it's also a really, really great way to improve your grantsmanship really, really quickly.
Yes.
Because you very quickly see what works and, most importantly, what does not work.
Absolutely.
So is it the catalyst is usually getting a grant, let's say from NSERC, then you're kind of on their radar, or do you have to be active to be on their radar?
Usually when you get a grant, then you are on their radar, but you can also ask to be, I think, as an observer on a review panel, because that will teach you very quickly how to write a grant and what not to do. And it's I think that's a very important exercise.
Yeah, and that was brought up in one of the earlier sessions. I'll remind everyone that CIHR has an observership program that we can all apply to.
Yeah,
sure.
I would strongly advise to use that opportunity.
What about strategies for getting invited to give talks? So Stem Cell Network's providing this, opportunity for ACRs, but that's not always there for every conference, and it's hard. It can be hard as an ACR to get that invited talk. How do we do that?
That's easy. You invite yourself.
Exactly. I was going to say, never underestimate the power of sending an email. It works almost 100% of the time. And if you go into it with, sometimes, not all the time, when I was pre-tenure, if I was traveling somewhere for some other reason, I would reach out to, so for example, if I would always go to a Gordon conference that's in Italy. I was going to go no matter what, right? So I already had planned to pay for my ticket to go there. I'm in Europe. I look around, I see what other universities are there. I see who I know, send a quick note and say, oh, I'm going to be in Europe. Is there a possibility for me to give a talk? And they almost always say yes. And so then they may also, help to support your travel there. They may not. Most of the time they do, even though you've sort of invited yourself. So you should just invite yourself.
That's a great Great point. I hadn't thought of that. What about going back to the point of referees and having these arm's length referees or champions that you've kind of thought of before planning out your collaborations? How do you select those people, and when do they get invited to be your arm's length referee?
Are you talking about referees for like tenure and stuff like this?
Yeah, so definitely for tenure, I've seen some awards that recommend or require an arm's length referee.
For me, I started building those connections when I was a postdoc, very, very, very intentionally. So in the last 2 years of my postdoc, I went to conferences with almost the goal of making sure I asked a lot of questions so that people knew who I was, and tried to just interact with the community a lot, and especially to connect with the leaders in those fields. And especially because I'm spanning across 2 very different fields, it was important to connect with leaders in both of those fields. So it was a little bit of a dual effort. But you need to sort of maintain connection, but not too much, I suppose, because ultimately they need to be arm's length, right? So that was my strategy early on. But I think you can start that process later as well, doing exactly the same thing.
You will often get a feel for people that like your work when you go to meetings and conferences, and you talk to them, and those are all good things. And then of course, once you get as old as I am, then arm's length is very often defined as published in the last 5 years. I've got people that I've known for 15 years that I haven't published with in the last 5 years. Then it gets easier, but of course that doesn't apply to ECRs. So I would say conferences. Get a feel. You can tell from the question they ask, or if they come to you after your talk or at your poster, whether they like it or not, what you are doing, and make notes.
Yeah, and likewise, your mentor should have introduced you to a few of them as well, and so you build your network, a looser one and a tighter one, and over time, and that's how you can then request those referees or build your referees.
It's definitely a little bit of, it's definitely some activation energy on your own. And especially, I think people think of me as an extrovert, but I'm very introverted. I'm more of an introverted extrovert. And so it's a lot of energy on my part to interact and engage with people at conferences, but it's super important. And eventually, it's fun once you get into it, but it is something that you have to put active energy into.
And are there certain types of conferences, so you mentioned like Gordon, for example, that you think would be ideal for this if you were intentionally trying to find these
smaller conferences help to have more molecular interactions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in my experience with Gordon conferences, they tend to have a lot of editors at them too, so that's a double whammy, I guess.
ISSCR is completely useless for that. Those 10,000 people conferences, usually not very, very efficient.
Yeah. I think FASAB are also on the order of a size that is very useful. And there's quite a lot of topics there as well. Sorry, Bernard, I interrupted you.
Yeah, I was going to say Keystone Conferences are the same. So these are really high level, very focused meetings with 50 to max 100 people, where you learn, you're exposed to people. They come there also for interactions, and you learn a lot about what's coming up in the field, because the presenters are not supposed to present already published work, but what they're currently working on, and then it becomes actually more like a brainstorming session or lab meeting.
In following up on the point that Bernard made, keep in mind that as ECRs, people don't know what you have in the pipeline necessarily. So you should feel very comfortable when, when you start to see these FASEB, GRC keystones coming online and they're announcing them. The names of the organizers are listed there as well. Don't be shy to just, write up a succinct abstract, shoot them an email and say, oh, I'm, pre-tenure at such and such a place, and my lab's doing some work and blah, blah, blah. Here's a really quick abstract. If there's any chance that it would be possible for me to give a talk, I would really value that. And if they can't, they can't. But if they can, so there's no harm to ask.
Yeah.
That's a great point. I think the other way to build your network and get your name out there, and then, that catalyzes more invitations, is getting involved in these organizing committees. So how do you recommend going about doing that? Is it possible to start your own kind of discussion group or your own kind of keystone and deal with that, or maybe reach out to people and invite yourself?
Because in ECR, you should limit those things and focus on your research, focus on getting 5-year funding, publications, protecting your time as much as humanly possible. You have decades of career ahead of you to organize things. That's me telling my former self what I shouldn't have done. But, you can definitely be involved in conferences, chairing sessions or organizing events for students or what have you, but it's probably better early on to stray away from too many administrative duties. Don't look at my...
I'll be completely honest. I feel for you ladies these days, because with this requirement for balancing genders and everything else, you're probably gonna be asked to organize conferences, be on committees and things like this, like several times a week. And I think, is that a problem for ECRs? I have no idea, because I'm not. Say no, Penny says, yeah.
Yeah, no, like I was just going to say, the focus is focus. As an early career investigator, you gotta be really laser sharp on your primary goals. And these are what Penny listed, period.
Period. It is the truth. In organizing conferences, you will have opportunities. Don't you worry about that. Get tenure first. It will happen. Don't feel jealous if you see your peers organizing conferences. Their time is being eaten up.
Yes, it's a marathon, not a 100-meter sprint.
Exactly.
So we have a question from the audience. Any tips on building a network outside of your research field? I guess with more and more of these interdisciplinary focused grants, this is becoming a necessity.
Oof. That's a tricky one.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I wonder if, I don't really have experience in this other than the cold emailing people in other fields to put together Human Frontiers grant. But one of the things that I've thought about as a strategy when I'm thinking that I want to get into another field is to purposefully attend a meeting that's in that area that I'm very foreign to, and using that as an opportunity to really understand what the field is about and to understand where the pulse of the field is and to meet people. I don't know, it's a little bit of a slow way, I suppose, because you have to wait for the conference to happen, but at least it's immersive.
For an early career investigator, I don't think that it's a good idea, because now you lose your focus. Once you're more established, then it's also easier to do. And we just saw a beautiful presentation demonstrating the opportunities that you get when you have a certain reputation. People actually look out for you. And I saw who asked that question, and I can tell that over time people will look for you and may want to collaborate with you.
Great, and related to sort of Jeff Karp's talk about translation, I'm sure we're all excited, and certainly people in the audience will have translational or commercializational nuggets coming out of their work. So how do you recommend building your network with translational and commercialization experts? Like yourself, Bernard.
Sorry.
How do we like reach out and cold call, or are there sort of conferences that we could target or other ways?
I think in Canada, if you feel like you have something that is translational, you can definitely cold call your colleagues or cold email your colleagues and start a conversation about that. I think it's pretty uncommon for ECRs to start out and have something translational already. I think Fabio can really attest to this. You start out and really your focus has to be fundamental knowledge. That is where translation is coming from. Molecular targets are what makes startup companies and therapies, and how do you find those? It's fundamental research. So there's a lot of pressure on ECRs to translate tomorrow, but you really have to keep your heart centered, which again, I wish I had told myself that, but and just carry forward with your fundamental research plans. If you happen to have been able to take an aspect of your research from your postdoc work and you're already able to continue that translational pipeline, that's incredible. But if that's not the case for you, it does not mean that you're failing. It means that you need to give your lab and your research a chance to mature.
And translation takes 5 to 15 years and $1 billion.
Yes, have you raised $1 billion yet? That's the
yeah, from discovery to implementation. So the point is that it takes time, and so as an ECI, yeah, you'll still be working off your first grant before this is going to happen.
So if I have to qualify, I mean, we just heard that Jeff Karp gave a whole talk without a single molecular target in there. And so I think that, Penny, me and you think that way because that's where we come from. We come from the basic biology, right? But maybe Nika, that comes from an engineering lab, she has the experience of her boss commercializing, what's it called, the Agrem well? I mean, that's just a plastic tissue culture plate, and yet had a huge impact on the field, right? So it's not always that complicated. And sometimes I think it's a matter of culture. And I do feel handicapped that I am a medical doctor that doesn't see patients. So I don't really have a good feel for the practical little problems that the doctor will meet in his practice. So I cannot invent the needle that stops at the right spot because I don't even know that that's a problem, hitting the right spot with that needle, right? And so that it's very much a matter of where you're coming from and how, in which type of environment you grew up. And I think as an ECR, probably you could, even though I'm not sure because I haven't done it, make an effort to expand your horizons and, raise your head from that molecular target and look around. There may be other things that you can translate that don't require $1 billion and 20 years of work and 1 out of 10, works and the other ones fail, like with molecular targets.
That's kind of related to the question Amy had asked Jeff in his talk, which was, should we be building these connections or reaching out to our local knowledge translation experts at our universities and institutions? Have you done that? Have you found that useful? Is it better to do that early, or kind of when you think this is ready to be commercialized?
Process of commercialization is so challenging, and there are so many people that it requires a network, and building that network very early and understanding what all of the components are really can only happen through just trying. So I mean, I'm saying molecular targets, but my lab too is going through the process of commercialization and thinking about that pathway, and the first efforts may indeed end in failure, but the fact is we've learned, and I've learned a lot about the ecosystem and just what the pathway is. So I will say that is exclusively because Canada and the Stem Cell Network in particular have really, really helped to frame our activities in that way and to prioritize the notion of translation. And so it's benefited my research program and the way that I think about things. So making those connections early, I do think is really important.
And we do have some good opportunities in the regenerative medicine field with CCRM and other things like this. Now, you know, in other fields, I'm not as knowledgeable, but I can tell you that I would start outside the institution, not inside the institution. And the reason is very simple. Because when you go talk to your technology transfer office and you tell them, I have this new technology, and by the way, that guy may be interested, all of a sudden you are at the center of attention. If you just go there and say, I have this technology, do you know who could be interested? Not really, you need to do the work. That ends up in the last drawer, okay? So, you know, this is sad because clearly, you know, I never had the experience of the technology transfer office telling me, I am not patenting any more of your inventions because you're not translating them, because they look for translatability before even thinking about patenting the invention. And if you don't have a precise target for that, they're not interested, at least at UBC. I don't know, you know, maybe Toronto's different.
No, it's the same. It's the same.
It's the same, right? So what I'm saying is the network needs to be created on the outside. Companies, venture capitalists, you name it, you know, go to even sometimes there's company directed conferences. I've been to a couple for the fibrosis field. And let me tell you, from a scientific point of view, they're boring as hell. But you learn a lot about the process that all these companies go to, and you create a network. Yeah, so start out, move in later.
That's good. That's really, really good advice. And that's definitely has been my experience as well. If I came to the office and said, these 5 companies are interested in this thing that I have, and here's the names of the company and the contact person, immediately I have responses on emails. But if it's not that, it's crickets.
I had the same experience in Edmonton, exactly the same. I reached out to them 3 times over 10 years, and I challenged them. I said, what do you need? I never got an answer. So yeah, go out and then come back with names.
I can tell you what they need. They need a licensing contract ready to sign. And then they will look at your technology.
Yeah, but to be fair, you know, speaking to industry and speaking to other entities in our Canadian and local ecosystem, it also provides you just a lot of feedback on what you think the value is of the thing that you have and how others see the value of what you have. And it helps guide and refine the work that you're doing in ways that are probably more valuable than just willy-nilly patenting and then reverse engineering over a long period of time. So
that relates to my follow-up question, which was, when should we do that? Is there value to kind of proactively engaging in those conversations for hypothetical projects, even ones that you're kind of ideating and writing grants around? And I ask particularly because more grants that I've seen are requesting this kind of knowledge translation component. You've mapped it out, you know, what you're going to do with the science or the technology that you're developing. So do you think there's value there, or is there kind of a danger there? How do we navigate that?
I'm sure industry, it's hard to get them to bite unless you've already have something in hand. So I think it would be very difficult to get that support letter or in-kind offer without something a little bit more tangible.
Do you think that they might be more receptive to like an advisory type support letter? Like, we will provide feedback, and it's a benefit to them perhaps because they get to keep tabs on what you're doing and maybe have the first dibs at
Good
it.
at managing their time.
Yeah.
We're much less good at managing our time.
If they don't want to sign an NDA, they are not interested. That's what it boils down to.
Right. So that's the other good point, right? Which is that we should always think about having that NDA in place, and then the tech transfer office becomes a really important resource for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a couple more questions, but we are running out of time. So if there is anyone else who has burning questions, now is definitely the time to put it in the Q&A section. I wanted to kind of circle back to the discussion about publications and tenure review and how collaborative publications or grants get viewed. Is there a sort of balance to be maintained? Maybe your collaborative papers are like far outweighing those coming from your lab. Is that viewed negatively?
I think one thing that is very important for ECRs to know is that there is not a magic recipe for what a clear home run for tenure is, unless you've published 100 papers and are senior author on all of them, and you have just millions of grants money that you've secured. I mean, there are some, but that rarely ever happens, right? So it's always going to be a balance. And so you need to have if you're going to have collaborative papers, that's not a bad thing. But if all of your publications are collaborative and you are not senior author on any of them, it doesn't matter that you published 100 of them. It's going to look really bad. So you need to make sure that you have a mix. And, if you're collaborating with, if I'm collaborating with Fabio and we're doing a close collaboration, and it's coming time to figure out, who should be senior author. I think I would propose, let's be co-senior author. Can I be last? You know what I mean? Just so that on paper, and so you can do things like that as well. But you need to make sure you have a mix both in your grant portfolio and also your independent publications. And in that regard, the highest value grants are really those long-term funding, CIHR and NSERC. Having those and being senior author on that's excellent. All of the other things are kind of icing on the cake.
And this is something else you should discuss early on, because again, even senior guys divide into groups. Like, I would immediately say, of course, Penny, you need it more than me. And honestly, it wouldn't make a damn difference to me whether I'm the co-last or co-one by last, right?
That's why I would work with Fabio.
But there is people that because of their ego, they cannot give it away. They need to accumulate credit, even when it's not really making a difference to their status or their career. And so you need to try to recognize those early.
Do you have any more tips on where we can go outside of NSERC and CIHR for perhaps more international collaborations? Does CIHR, do you know if they would allow international collaborators to come on board?
I think
if send money. Oh, sorry, Bernard.
I mean, if it makes sense for the project that you're describing, then definitely, I think if you have an international collaborator, that would be seen as a strength. But it has to make sense, right? And then it's very easy to justify.
Are you asking, are there grants outside of Canada that one could access?
And also inside, that would be, open to moving money across the border. I know that some American grants like NSF I've experienced do not allow movement to.
There's definitely, you have to kind of keep your eyes open and be creative. So a lot of universities will have these mobility type grant opportunities. So I know, I'm not sure if it's just University of Toronto, but there's a France-Canada initiative, and it's a small funding opportunity, but it's meant to spark collaboration and to support a student coming to Canada or going to France to be able to work on a collaborative project. And with those sorts of local opportunities, it tends to be easier to get them because you're not competing against all of Canada. And so those opportunities are good ones to keep an eye out for. Things like, I know NFRF, I think, had sort of you could have international, but it's so competitive and the funding rate is so low, and it's very difficult to tell what is going to be funded, that it's not that you shouldn't do it. You should definitely dream science and put in applications if you have the bandwidth. But if you don't have the bandwidth, you should always prioritize 5-year funding. It allows you to build your team and have a lot of confidence of what's going to happen in 5 years.
But there are other opportunities, like the classical one would be the rare disease organization, you know, was run out of Europe, but it requires ECR as applicants, among other things, and it requires diversity, geographical diversity. So that's a good one, competitive, not easy to get, but if you get one of those, you're in good shape.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
I also have a question that's kind of related to the last session, which was all about building your scientific reputation. And this relates to then, how do you build a reputation of being a good collaborator? One that's reliable, adds value, and doesn't overextend themselves and overcommit themselves.
I think you just defined it right there, Nika.
So, but then how do others view and know that? Because they can't always tell kind of what's going on behind the scenes, that, you know, Nika's being really selective in who she's collaborating with or she's not.
So again, you build your reputation over time, right? And it's not a 100-meter sprint, it's a marathon. It will take 5 to 7 years for people to notice you in the field, and you will have to maintain that you will have to be consistent, right? And so you have to accept that, to be patient about this, and yeah, that takes time.
And people will kind of see that reflected in your publications, and they'll kind of note that who you had co-authored.
Yes, yes, and then in conferences, people will talk about you, will mention to their colleagues that you're a reliable collaborator, and that yeah, you're reliable, you stick to the deals, and you're good to work with.
Yeah,
so it's gossip fueled.
Those are the reference letters I was talking about. Okay. I have one last question, and if no one else has questions, then we can wrap up a little early. But this relates to technology. And so we spoke a bit about Slack, but increasingly we're seeing more and more scientists on Twitter. And that does help kind of build your, at least a virtual network, and perhaps could lead to collaborations. So I wonder if you have any tips for how to use these tools to build our network in a meaningful way.
I'm going to mute myself here.
I used Twitter for the first part of my career, and in some ways it is, I really like it because I like the opportunity to connect to students, and that's almost exclusively how I use it. I don't really use it any other way. But one of the ways that I think is important to make people aware of is there is absolutely research and data related to you tweeting your publications and that tweet being retweeted and the amount of citations that your work receives downstream. And I don't like that that is a truth, but right now it is a truth. And so for ECRs, it is possible that if for you, feeling like you've been successful looks like having a high H index, if that's something that you value, then these measures might be things that you might proactively do because they will help. But otherwise, I think it's just it's a great place to kind of see science, because I love seeing the papers that people retweet. So that's the joy that I get from it, is the students and the science. There's a lot of joy I don't get from it.
I think self-promotion has always been incredibly important in this job, and that's just now it happens on Twitter instead of happening somewhere else.
Yeah, and increasingly I'm seeing, or at least my trainees are pointing out, that people are kind of telling short stories using their publications, but with like cartoons and fun figures via Twitter. And I think that also could help improve readership. It works for my trainees, so I'm sure it's working for others as well. Okay, are there any other kind of final thoughts or parting words, do's and don'ts that you think we definitely should talk about before we wrap up?
Focus on papers. Focus on 5-year funding. Don't dilute your time.
Strategic network building. Sorry,
and
Bernard.
if you are a young PI, you're already done 95% of the work. Don't be afraid. You will have success eventually.
Yeah, again, the most important word is focus.
Focus, strategic networks, papers, 5-year funding. Anything else? You will succeed. I like ending on the positive note. That's great.
Yes. And if you're passionate about what you're doing, you will succeed.
Yeah, it shows.
Because you won't work. You will just do what you like to do.
Fantastic. Okay, well, as always, we'd like to hear from you. This is the first time that the Stem Cell Network has held a session like this. So for those in the audience and also for our panelists, we'd love to get your feedback. And we'd also love to hear if you have suggestions for other topics we could consider doing these types of panel discussions and improve the overall experience if you have suggestions. Following the session, you'll receive an email from Janice with an evaluation form to fill out. So please do take a moment to fill out and share your feedback. I also wanted to remind you, we've already mentioned that we plugged this a couple of times, but I wanted to mention again, don't forget, as we announced in our previous sessions, Stem Cell Network is launching an early career investigator speaker competition to be held in the 2021 Till and McCulloch meetings. And this competition provides up to 3 ECRs with the opportunity to present their progress from their research programs to the broad stem cell and regenerative medicine research audience at the upcoming meetings in November in pre-recorded sessions that will become available on demand for everyone to view after the conference. So please do submit an abstract. There was an email sent out about that and how to do that. The deadline for abstract submission is Friday, April 30th by 11:59 p.m. Pacific. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact the Stem Cell Network and specifically John Draper. So on behalf of the Stem Cell Network, Thébaud, my fellow moderators, and I would love to thank all the panelists and our guest speakers for giving their time and sharing their experiences and advice with us. I found the discussions to be illuminating. I took a lot of notes, as you probably saw me typing, and I appreciate their candor and their generosity. And I want to thank you all for participating in this sort of interactive event. I hope you enjoyed this time as well. We wish you all best in your careers, and as our panelists told us, you will succeed. It's all about working hard and loving what you do. So thanks again, everyone, and thanks so much.
Everybody.
Thank you, Nika, for moderating. And thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That was excellent. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.